Yeah, so my presentation is on women's political participation in Cambodia and Myanmar, a brief comparison. This is part of the project on understanding barriers and working pathways to women's political participation in Myanmar. That is in conjunction, as Edgar mentioned, with Gender Equality Network, GEN, based in Yangon, and the Asian Institute of Technology. What I'll present today is a small slice of the larger project. The project itself is focused in Myanmar, but one element of it is a comparison with Cambodia, and that is what I will present today. The outline for the presentation is the following, and I just want to lay out the main points so it's clear to everyone where I will go with this presentation. First, I want to lay out the logic for comparing Cambodia and Myanmar, what the cases have in common. Then I will lay out what is the contrast, that is where they vary in the outcome. And here I'll focus on two issue areas. One is the proportion of women in parliament, and then secondly, a domestic violence law. And here I will show a contrast between Cambodia and Myanmar. And then I will seek to provide a tentative explanation for this contrast. And I will rely on a historical institutional analysis, that is the historical institutional formation of the Cambodia Ministry of Women's Affairs, and secondly, the process of decentralization. So why compare cases? Comparative analysis is crucial for developing theory that can explain variation in outcomes. Without comparison, we don't really have any control for establishing causal relationships. And even comparison that is largely descriptive, that is, it puts cases in parallel to each other, and is not driven by theory, still allows one to make broader analytical inferences. So I'm going to argue that comparative analysis provides value added for clear evidence-based social science analysis of questions that matter for policy. This slide, I want to show that there are at least four variables that provide a basis, a logic for comparing between Cambodia and Myanmar. And these include geography, economics, geopolitics, and regime type. So in terms of geography, both Cambodia and Myanmar are located in mainland Southeast Asia. In terms of economics, if we look at the Human Development Index, they are both ranked in the third tier as medium human development. And in fact, Cambodia and Myanmar are ranked 145th and 146th. They are right next to each other. In terms of geopolitics, they've both gone through significant traumas, Cambodia, war and genocide, and Myanmar with extensive ethnic wars. And in terms of regime type, meaning the type of government, they're both quite illiberal. Cambodia is assessed as having a hegemonic authoritarian regime, and Myanmar as a hybrid illiberal regime. Now, Cambodia is somewhat more autocratic than Myanmar, but in general, they both have significant illiberal elements. Just to deepen the point of comparing these cases and what they have in common, if we look at the Human Development Index, it's very clear that they are very much aligned, very similar. So the orange line Cambodia, the purple line Myanmar, we can see that they are both about 0.58. To deepen the point about similarity in terms of regime type, if we measure this by Freedom House in 2020, the nominal categorization of Cambodia and Myanmar is the same. That is, they're both considered by Freedom House as not free. If we look at the actual scores in terms of global freedom, and a higher score is a better score, more towards democracy, Myanmar ahead of Cambodia, 30 to 25. In terms of political rights, also ahead of Cambodia. But in terms of civil rights, Cambodia is scoring a little bit better than Myanmar. So although Cambodia is overall more autocratic, in fact, in terms of assessing them, Freedom House puts them as quite similar. So what I've done so far is provided a logic, a basis for arguing that Cambodia and Myanmar are quite similar and therefore are comparable. And from here, I want to pivot to then look at what is different, what are contrasting outcomes from two cases that are quite, in fact, similar. And I want to focus on two issues. The first is the proportion of women in national parliament, and then look at a domestic violence bill. First, if we look at the lower house, and again, the orange line is Cambodia, the purple is Myanmar, we see that in the lower house, the proportion of women in parliament, Cambodia has about 20% and Myanmar about 10%. It's about twice as much for Cambodia vis-a-vis Myanmar in terms of proportion of women in the lower house. In the upper house, a similar trend, Cambodia about 18%, Myanmar about 10%. So both lower and upper house, Cambodia ahead of Myanmar in terms of proportion of women in parliament. Now, if we look at a second issue area, domestic violence law, we see also an interesting contrast. In Myanmar, it's taken more than 7 years for a bill known as the Prevention and Protection of Violence Against Women law to be introduced, not yet passed, but introduced into Parliament, and this occurred in February 2020. And I should note that our partner here in our larger project, Gender Equality Network, has been very much involved in this domestic violence bill in terms of providing significant consultation and working papers on this bill. By contrast, Cambodia passed a bill on domestic violence law in 2005 in Parliament. This is known as the Law on the Prevention of Domestic Violence and Protection of Victims. So quite a significant contrast. Myanmar, it is finally being tabled in Parliament, but not yet finalized. In Cambodia, it was passed in Parliament in 2005, a good 15 years earlier. Now, there are still problems with Cambodia's law in terms of implementation, in terms of scope, but at least it was passed a good 15 years earlier. So again, a contrast between Myanmar and Cambodia. And from here, I want to provide some explanation, a tentative explanation for this contrast. And I want to rely on an institutional analysis for this. First, I will look at Cambodia's Ministry of Women's Affairs and then at decentralization. Now, the Ministry of Women's Affairs in Cambodia was established in 1993. And a key individual in this ministry was Musa Kua, who was the MP for Funcinpec, the party of Ranariddh. She then became the Minister of Women's Affairs in 1998. She was crucial because she authored the domestic violence law that eventually was passed in Parliament in 2005. She also pushed other important initiatives, including enabling gender focal points in other ministries across the Cambodian state. And as a former community activist herself, building NGOs in Cambodia, she established a number of government civil society partnerships with the Ministry of Women's Affairs. The second institutionalist element I want to look at is decentralization in Cambodia's commune elections. Decentralization occurred in Cambodia in 2002 as a process of democratization, and this created the basis for women to enter into office through commune elections at a local level. Again, Musa Kua, a crucial actor in this process. In 2002, she worked to mobilize 12,000 women candidates to run in the commune elections. Eventually, 900 were elected, and this ushered in a new generation of women politicians in Cambodia. And it's interesting to note that this move came in part because Musa Kua and others had pressured political parties on a national level to allow for about 30% of candidates to run in political parties at the national level. The parties committed to this, but did not, in fact, implement this. And so there was a deeper push at the local level to then pursue this. And if we look at the numbers at the Commune Council elections, women candidates between 2002 and 2017, we see that in 2002, at the beginning, less than 8%. By 2012, it doubled to 16%. And 2017, we see that it declined a little bit, but overall remained a trend has been positive. And just to draw out the contrast, I want to lay out a very interesting quotation from an interview that was conducted by Jen on January 31 to draw out the contrast between institutional questions of implementation between Myanmar and Cambodia. And this interview here is with a Union Elections Commissioner who identifies problems of implementation of ministries on issues of women's affairs. And she notes that ministries have gender policies, but when we check them, no implementation has been seen because they talk but take no action, no plan and no budget. They are just satisfying on having a few women's participation, let's say 5% or 15%. There is a women empowerment group in the Ministry of Social Welfare, Relief and Resettlement, but they are ineffective to take action on women's issues. Everything is just on paper, but not effective in reality. So this is a good contrast that indicates the problems of institutional implementation. And to conclude, a few points, and then the very last takeaway point is the in boldface at the very end. Comparison is crucial to help explain why a case has done well in a particular policy field. Without explicit comparison, it is difficult to know scientifically how to situate a case's outcome and trajectory. Myanmar and Cambodia, I argue, share many common characteristics that justify comparison. And Cambodia generally does better than Myanmar on at least two issues: on the percentage of women in political office and on the passage of the domestic violence law. I've sought to explain this through a historical institutionalist argument based on the early establishment of the Ministry of Women's Affairs and the early effort at decentralization through commune elections. I want to caution, however, that this doesn't mean that Cambodia does particularly well in absolute terms. There are also significant institutional problems that remain, including the Ministry of Women's Affairs. Cambodia does better than Myanmar on the two issues I've raised today, but in absolute terms, there is significant room for improvement. And Kyoko Kusakabe notes in an article in Gender and Development in 2010 the problems of local implementation of the Ministry of Women's Affairs. So relative to Myanmar, Cambodia does better, but in absolute terms, still significant progress to be made. And the very last point, the takeaway message I want to emphasize is this. Comparing institutions, their historical formation, their processes, their capacities, their weaknesses, are central to explaining variation in trajectories in women's political participation and in the passage of laws supporting women's rights. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Eric. That's a really good presentation of this comparison between Cambodia and Myanmar. Natina, are we ready for the transition? Because now we're going to switch gears and take a deeper dive into Myanmar politics.
Can you see right now?
Yes.
Can you hear me well?
Fine. Yes, go ahead.
Great. Hang on. Right. So can you see the main screen?
Yes.
So I can just show this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you especially to Agad and having me back again, IDRC. So without further ado, I'll just dive straight into the presentation. There'll be two parts to this brief presentation. The first part, I'll briefly talk about our research project with MREF, the local NGO that we have been working with, and our activities for the last 3 years. And also, the second part of my presentation will focus more on the findings of a working paper that we have recently published. So without further ado, as you know, women's parliamentary representation in Myanmar remains really low. Females constitute 51.8% of Myanmar's total population, but only 11.3% of MPs in the lower house are females. And there's considerable variation between parties for MPs that are women from the different parties. As you can see here, SNLD has about 16.7%, while PNO has 0%. So comparatively to regional governments, as Eric has pointed out earlier, Myanmar is not doing well. Myanmar's parliamentary representation for women has risen over time. It remains very low. So the bigger project that our team has been involved with, that is supported by IDRC and working with MREF and also supported by McMaster, is entitled Engendering Political Recruitment and Participation at the Party, Local and National Level. And this is a 3-year project that we have worked together very closely in the last few years. And this is our team. As you can see, it's a big team. We have Eric.
It's not showing on the screen. It's not showing on the screen.
Oh, it's not.
Yeah.
So did you see all of my slides?
Yeah, we saw the cover and it stayed there in the cover.
I see. Okay, so you missed this slide. That was my parliamentary representation in Myanmar slide.
Yeah, we still don't see it. We still don't see it.
Okay, can you see it right now?
Not yet.
Wow, okay. I'm not sure. Can you see this?
No.
Can you see this? Can you see this?
No, unfortunately not.
Okay, so can you pass the slide back to me?
Okay, now Probably now you can take control.
Okay.
Yeah, now we see the team, the questions and approach, the team.
So,
Women's parliamentary representation
can
in
you see
Myanmar.
this right now?
Yeah.
So all the numbers that I'm showing you right now, so this was a slide 2 to show the considerable variation between parties. The name of our group project that's supported by IDRC, and we have been working very closely with MREF, and this is our international and MREF team. As you can see, it is a big team. We have about 6 international scholars from Canada, Yale and US, Sweden, and US. And in MREF, I'm very glad to have Ale with us today. Ale is here, and she'll probably help to insert some comments later or correct some of the data that we have presented later if she has a chance. And so we have been working very closely with the MREF team here. They have very good researchers and very diligent group of field researchers that they have hired that help out in our data collection. So our big research project is driven by this question: to what extent are opportunities different for men and women to become MPs in Myanmar, and why? For our project, we focus not only on supply, problem or demand factors, but we look at the interaction of both factors to look at specifically how parties recruit women and the motivations that shape women's ambitions. We also make a very specific effort to look at parties as a male-dominated institutions and understand the conditions under which women enter party politics and be nominated as candidate. So we know that in previous studies, lots of studies have told us about what are the different cultural and institutional factors that shape women's and men's opportunities for political party participation. Some of the basic theories or findings that we have built on that we know in Myanmar, parties are heavily male-dominated, and men tend to know and recruit other men based on the old boys network. And they are also less likely to admit that gender discrimination is a problem. And also we know that most of the politicians come from what we call political dynastic families. So having a father involved in politics increases the likelihood of either the son or daughter being involved in politics. What is unusual in Myanmar is also that women are more likely to be highly educated than men in terms of university degree. A lot of them have a tertiary education. However, of course, with older people, the older generation, women are more likely to be illiterate or have no schooling. So there are 3 stages in our research project. We have 3 years. And in the first year, what we did was we did a lot of a few trainings with MREF, and we conducted both trial of elite interviews, mostly with MPs, candidates, and party officials. And in year 2, we continue with training, but mostly quantitative training in terms of survey data analysis, and also training on focus group discussion, how to moderate. Year 2 was also a year where we started collecting data around the country, which was a big project. In year 3, we started our data analysis and write-ups, and hence this year we finally finished writing and completing our working paper 1, which summarizes our year 1's activities. And currently the work is still ongoing in analyzing the survey data. And we had also a planned group for MREF staff to visit Indonesia and Malaysia, but currently it's on hold because of the COVID travel ban. So for the next few slides, I'm going to show you some of the pictures of our visits and our interviews. So this pictures of the first time we've met with MREF group. And Paul here is our local consultant. Guillaume is our economist, who is also part of our training group. And this is Ale and Mietet, who is the founder of MREF. And these are some of our elite interview trials that we have gone on to trial out our questionnaire. These are some of the interview trials with party and local leaders. So one of the key distinctive features of our research is that we really want to focus on the local politics and intra-party politics to understand how politics work within parties and at the local village level. This is another gender training workshop by bjarnegard on how to conduct gender-sensitive analysis in looking at development work. And we also conducted trainings with MREF to standardize the way we conduct our interviews to make sure that we have standard protocols and code the questions correctly in our Excel and to load our data in a secure way. So this was just a brief presentation, a summary of what we have done so far. So our research outputs, which is going to be the basis of my presentation today, will be on working paper 1, party building and candidate selection, which you can download it here from MREF website, and also a briefing note that we have summarized to make it really easy for the parties to know how to go about increasing women's political representation in Myanmar. So it is also included in our recommendations. And I've thus far done 2 webinars, and we have also a blog that looks at and summarizes the work that we are doing. So we have a working paper 2 that is currently in progress, and hopefully we'll finish our final report by early next year. There are other research products that you may be interested in. As Edgar said earlier, I've presented earlier in the first series of this presentation on ethnic parties and electoral system. You may be interested in looking at this special issue at European Journal of Development Research that has a whole series of articles on Myanmar. So I'm going to go very briefly into the working paper and our findings. So there are 8 parts to our working paper that focuses a lot of candidate selection and never before done the selection mechanisms for selection of the CEC, Central Executive Committee, and the Central Committee in 9 different parties. So there are 8 parts to our paper, which is pretty long. And today I'm just going to go through really briefly. And if you are interested in any of the details, please feel free to download the reports or email me if you have any questions. So briefly on our research method and party study, we focus specifically on 9 parties of varied sizes, organizations, ages, and ideological platform. So the names of the 9 parties are listed there. I'm not going to go through them. But just suffice to say, we try to select a big variety, those that have won in elections and those who have not, and those who are ethnic-based parties and those who are multinational kind of mass-based parties. We conducted a total of 72 interviews from November 2018 to March 2019. And there are 2 groups to our interviewees. The candidates, those who have sat and participated in elections, both winners and losers, and also with gatekeepers. And that is what makes our research so precious, is because we managed to interview high-level top gatekeepers at the party level, people who sit in the CEC, people who are actually in charge of candidate selection. And our interview topics ranges from personal backgrounds, their own personal motivations for joining politics, into their understanding of what type of intra-party rules are in place for the parties for selecting candidates, what kind of criteria they use for promoting and recruiting candidates, and their experiences in rallying the ground and experiences as politicians, first-time politicians, or politicians that have resigned or retired. So our interviews are conducted in Myanmar language, and our MREF trained researchers go out to the field to interview them, and then they come back and translate into English. And then our team, which is made up of Eileen, Paul, myself, Ailey, and we sit down together and we, code the interviews and we analyze them over time. And there have been many, many Skype meetings just to figure out the different types of feedback and transcripts. So basically, as you can see, there are 9 parties on the left-hand side here. And the parties vary a lot in terms of the number of women they have in as fielded as candidates in the past election. We have Mon, which has a total of 19% that are fielded as candidates, but there's 0 elected. So we do have a wide range of parties that are included in the study. So now I'm going to quickly jump through the key findings. I have about 10 key findings and then recommendations, and then I'll wrap up. So the key findings are that the interview backgrounds tell us that most of these candidates and gatekeepers come from education background, wholesale, retail background. And what is important is that most of them have families or some personal networks with parties, which explains why they are recruited. And a lot of the candidates suggest that the father, especially women candidates and interviewees, suggested that father plays a very key role in why they want to join politics. Also, some of them also mentioned that their background in religious or social groups also encouraged them to participate in politics. And a key finding in our research is that intra-party politics matter a lot. And our paper gets into really a lot of details about the democratic or undemocratic selection process of the CEC, CC, and TEC, which is TEC refers to the Town Executive Committee at the town level. So the selection methods varies. And for example, NLD is very democratic in terms of the selection of leaders at the bottom level. But in terms of the CEC, it's very much directed by one person. You know, the person and the small group of people would appoint people to be in the CEC. And what other key findings include that there's a large gender imbalance in CEC. All CECs remain male-dominated. As you can see here, the total number of CEC members vary quite a lot, from a low of 19 to the high of 45. USDP has such a big CEC, but the percentage of females in CEC remains really low. Other key findings I've suggested earlier is that the formation and selection of CEC and CC vary quite a lot. Besides the fact that the sizes vary considerably, which makes it very difficult for us to make any kind of generalization. But what we can say is that there's generally a bottom-up process in the selection of the Central Committee composition. So there'll be representatives at the township level. The party representatives will be invited to come in to put in their bid. Either they can self-nominate or they can nominate somebody they know to be representative to participate in township committee, and then they will vote. So when we say that it is democratic, we basically refer to an internal election method. When there's no internal election, if it is directly through appointment, we say it is not democratic. So as you know, right now, candidate selection process is ongoing right now in Myanmar before the run-up to elections. Everybody should be watching with bated breath who gets included in the candidate selection list. So for candidate selection, this is what is very interesting, is that most parties follow a standard process to nominate candidates. They usually start at the township level, arranging a candidate election process. They either have what they call a candidate selection team, right, to go out to nominate, to ask people to join. And then the township level, they will have a candidate list, then they send it out to the CC. The CC will vet. They will scrutinize the candidates, either reject some or approve before they are sent up to the CEC for final approval. Other smaller parties or not as organized parties, such as MNP, PNO, and SNLD, are known to appoint their candidates without going through this democratic bottom-up process. KSDP especially is very disorganized. It was very difficult for us to find any patterns in their process. The other key findings is that we know generally we need to know who has the most power in the candidate selection, and the CEC for most party is the selectorate. the selectorate has the most power in deciding who becomes a candidate. And the key candidate traits are the candidates ought to have high educational level, being young helps. The ethnicity has been cited by most ethnic parties as a key criteria, but for not all. Popularity, respectability, if the person has been a doctor or a teacher, usually helps a lot. And of course, political background experience. What is interesting is very few mention gender as a key candidate trait that they are looking for. And our interviewees also tell us and share with us their campaign and political experiences. They all report high personal costs to their family life. 80% reported no significant improvement in their personal lives. There's a lot of sacrifice on their family, especially when they are on a run, on rallies. Both male and female report difficulties covering remote or conflict areas. And especially traveling is especially problematic for women at night, as this is seen inappropriate. There are also candidates also, or interviewees also reported financial difficulties with their political life. And women, we found out that also some interviewees report that they rely on the financial assistance of husbands and relatives to support their political career. And both men and women have reported that the MP salary is inadequate for them to maintain their political lifestyle. What is most important, which came later in our interviews, we found that violations of personal integrity while the candidates are rallying differ. So there are different types of harassment that they feel, some that they experience. Some experience violence, destruction to the offices. Some mention more online harassments. So both men and women experience online ethnic, religious-based intimidation. But women are more likely to be victims of personal accusations about their image or about their personal lives and about their family members. They're more likely to get that kind of harassment. So finally, based on all our findings, we have come up with 6 to 7 recommendations to parties, and we have make them into very easy to understand layman terms in the booklet that I showed you earlier. Basically, our recommendations is that parties need to build their party organizations and establish clear rules on who get access to power, who gets nominated, how do you get nominated, and these rules have to be clearly written. And we also recommend that parties expand and diversify their candidate pool from the bottom up. So we give some suggestions on focus on town executive committees and having a more democratic bottom-up process. We also suggest having party quotas and targets internally for parties, and also providing financial support to women candidates, small amount of money for them to campaign or to put publicity, but also training is not enough, but also financial support is important. Most importantly, we suggest that the parties also need to improve security and provide women candidates party aid during campaign, especially in rural areas or when they have to stay overnight. Finally, for all candidates, we suggest that it is important to provide training and establish a good code of conduct and best practices for candidates to campaign online. And this we see is the next kind of project for future work. Thank you very much for your patience, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Nitina. While we are waiting for getting some